Yesterday, Sayadaw explained that if one does not have control over one's mind with mindfulness, if one does not control and letting the mind go free on the 5 kinds of sense objects, at first one frees his or her mind once, and then if she does not know it, she will repeatedly let the mind go free on these sense objects. So if this happens, the person will be drowning in the sensual objects. So by failing to refrain from these sense objects, one will be losing wholesomeness that can arise by refraining from these sensual happiness, sensual objects. So the mind will be deluded, and if one does not strengthen the mind, if one does not put necessary strength in the mind, then the mind will be small and weak. When the mind is weak, when she come across stronger things, then the weaker mind will be defeated by the stronger. So when the weak and the strong encounter each other, then the strong gains the upper hand, and the weak one is defeated, and the weak one has to give up. So if one has a very weak mind which is not matured, then when she come across difficulty, she will become depressed and fall down or break down. So in order to make the mind matured, one needs to put necessary strength in the mind. One needs to strengthen the mind. One needs to energize the mind. So in order to strengthen and energize the mind, Satipatthana meditation is the best. So Satipatthana meditation can make the mind strengthened and energized. So if one does not strengthen the mind, if one does not make the mind matured, then whenever she come across sensual objects, she will be indulging, going after the sensual objects, and she will be influenced by the sensual objects. So this person will be influenced and controlled by the sensual objects. So when the person come across pleasant and unpleasant objects, desirable and undesirable situation, the person does not have any resistance, but she will break down. So if we find the cause of it, it shows that the person does not have necessary strength in the mind, and that the person's mind is not matured yet. So when the mind does not have strength, or when the mind is not matured, then it will be called what we call in Burmese as brittle mind. The kind of mind that is very quick to respond, which is very sensitive. So one needs prudence. So so that one will be able to refrain from bad things. So being able to refrain from bad things, one will not meet harm. And if one can perform things that should be performed, one will benefit. And one needs prudence, power of prudence. And one needs to approach Kalyana Mitta, one needs to approach a true friend so that she will get the accurate method in order to strengthen one's mind. So getting this accurate method, the person will be able to strengthen and energize the mind, and knowledge will develop. And his or her mind will become from tender to matured. So when the person gains maturity of mind, she will have spiritual stamina. And the other day, Sayadaw explained on Appamada based on misconduct. But the kind of Appamada, forgetfulness or negligence, indulging in sensual pleasure, going after the sensual objects, it is not as gross as the Appamada concerning with Dujjarita, misconduct. So the kind of Appamada that has to do with having pleasure with the sensual objects, it is the medium form of Appamada. If one is satisfied with the pleasure with sensual object that she owns, she is not blameworthy in the worldly sense. But if the person is spending a lot of time with the sensual pleasure or sensual objects, then she is missing the kind of pleasure or happiness that excels so many times than the worldly pleasure. So that's why it is very important that the person knows that there is the kind of happiness and pleasure that excels so many times than the worldly pleasure. So in order to get this genuine happiness and genuine pleasure, which has a guarantee, one needs to let go of the sensual pleasure on these sense objects, little by little, gradually. So in order to get the kind of happiness that is genuine and that is of high class, one needs to let go the sensual pleasure gradually by gradually. And one needs to practice hard in order to get this genuine kind of happiness and pleasure. So the yogis who are here, you are practicing, trying hard in order to get this kind of genuine pleasure, genuine happiness that has a guarantee, which excels so much more than the worldly pleasure. So Sayadaw will explain about how to strengthen or how to energize the mind later on. And it is said that letting the mind go free on sensual objects is not as gross as letting the mind go free on Dujjarita, misconduct. So letting the mind go free on the sensual object is called medium form of Appamada. People who do not practice bhavana, mental development practice, people who do not know the correct way of practice in order to develop the mind and the knowledge, these people are spending much of their time in sensual pleasure on sensual objects. From the time they get up in the morning, as soon as they become awake, they are thinking about desirable objects and they are thinking about good things. And they continue to think about pleasant things all day long, continuously. And they are not getting fed up with thinking about sensual objects. And they do not get bored in thinking about good things or sensual objects. When it is said that they are not bored in thinking about sensual objects, that means they are enjoying, they are taking pleasure in thinking about good things and sensual objects. So most of these people are wasting their precious time on sensual objects. So the time that the person is fast asleep, this is the only time that they stop thinking about sensual pleasure, sensual objects. So the time that they are fast asleep, it is the only time they are not thinking about sensual pleasure or sensual objects. So at the time of sleep, they are resting from thinking about sensual objects. But at the time they wake up, from the time they wake up, they start thinking about sensual objects the whole day long, the whole night long, the whole month long, the whole life long. So if they are letting their mind go free on sensual objects, these people are negligent or failing to practice the Dhamma. So by letting their mind go free, they are failing, they are negligent of these wholesomeness. So if one does not have any control, if his or her mind will only be on sensual objects, she is said to have Appamada on wholesomeness. So when the person is letting the mind on desirable objects, there will be kama vitaka, thoughts about sensual pleasure. And when the mind goes on to undesirable objects, then there will be anger, aversion, and in this way there will be vyabhara vitaka, thoughts on ill will. And when the envy and jealousy come into the mind, then the person will be thinking about hurting others, destroying others. There will be abhijja. And most of the people, because they are in the realm of sensual realm, they are spending much of their time on sensual objects. So if one does not know the faults of sensual pleasure, sensual objects, and if one think of them as good, then there will be moha, delusion. So one will have delusion, haziness, not clear on these sensual objects as they are bad ones. So there will be not knowing or knowing wrongly, so there will be delusion. So when this happens, one will be losing the wholesome mind, which is free from moha. And when one is thinking about pleasant objects, pleasant sensual objects, there will be greed. The mind will be associating with greed. So when this happens, he, she is losing the kind of wholesome mind that is free from lobha. And when the person comes across unpleasant objects, there will be hatred, aversion, anger. So the mind, the unwholesome mind associating with this aversion, hatred will arise. And he, she is said to be losing the kind of wholesome mind that is associating with moha. That is associating with metta, loving kindness. So if the person is negligent, then he, she will be losing benefit. If the person is not negligent or not forgetful, then he, she will not lose precious things. So one should be not forgetful, as if one does not forget to keep properly the precious, valuable things that are handed down generation by generation from the ancestors. So in the same way, one should not be forgetful or negligent in order to develop wholesomeness, so that he, she will not be losing wholesomeness. So Buddha said, Appamada manu yongchanti bala domedino jana. It means that the foolish who do not know the fault of sensual pleasure, sensual objects, who do not know that Appamada should be valued and cherished, these people are letting their mind go free on sensual objects, so they are negligent, and they are negligent again and again, repeatedly letting their mind go free, repeatedly on sensual objects. So these are the foolish ones. The ones who are not negligent or who do not fail to refrain from unwholesomeness, the people who are not negligent to stay in austerity, in sensual pleasure, people who value and cherish Appamada, and the people who practices Appamada respectfully, meticulously. These people are practicing Appamada, not forgetting to practice Appamada, just as people will keep the inheritance, the precious things that are handed down by ancestors generation after generation. So in the same way, these wise people are cherishing Appamada just as they would cherish precious things that are handed down by the ancestors. So the wise people, they follow the path of Appamada. The foolish follow the path of Appamada. And the wise people, they follow and walk straight on this path of Appamada. So, the yogis who are here, you are following the path of Appamada, so you are wise people. Failure of being negligent to refrain from things that should be refrained is called Appamada. Failure of being negligent in order to perform things that should be performed is also called Appamada. None of these Appamada are good. So one should know that Appamada is not good. So that's why Buddha taught directly. Buddha did not taught in an indirect way, but Buddha taught directly as Ma Appamada Manuyonjeta. That means do not repeatedly be using Appamada. Do not repeatedly be associating with Appamada. So it means that do not be negligent. Do not let one's mind go freely on these sense objects. Do not be associating with sensual objects. So Buddha taught this way because Buddha saw the faults of Appamada. So just as a compassionate parent, just as the parents who have loving kindness and compassion will forbid the child from eating unsuitable food because the parents know that unsuitable food will be harmful. And on the other hand, the parent also make the child eat suitable food so that it will be beneficial. Because the parents, they have compassion towards their child, they do not want the child to meet with harm by eating unsuitable food. And the parent wants the child to be beneficial by eating suitable food. So in the same way, Buddha gave guidance in order to bring benefit of the beings. And Buddha also prohibited so as to be free from harm. So Buddha prohibiting, it does not mean that Buddha wants to suppress the beings, but Buddha prohibited because Buddha saw the flaws or the fault of Appamada. If one's mind is on sensual objects, then she is forgetful or not mindful of the true nature in oneself. So by letting one's mind free without any control on these sensual objects, the person is said to be forgetful or negligent on wholesomeness. It is called Appamada. The kind of Appamada which is negligent of wholesomeness. So this kind of Appamada, negligent or forgetfulness, is not the kind of forgetfulness or loss of memory when falling from a higher place, or it is not the kind of forgetfulness or loss of memory when being drowned, or it is not the kind of forgetfulness due to illness. But this kind of forgetfulness is the kind of forgetfulness that seems to have good feeling. The kind of forgetfulness is not like the forgetfulness that Saraji mentioned. So you can imagine what kind of forgetfulness it is. So people are having fun, going, coming, eating, and also enjoying good sights, enjoying good sounds, good music, good smells, good fragrance, good flavor, good touch, with luxurious, soft, gentle bed or sofa. And when it is getting cold, people keep themselves warm, and when it is very hot, they like to have the touch of cool air. So people are seeking for comfort in many ways, and they also take pleasure in contact between the opposite sex, and they are forgetful of the wholesomeness. So they are forgetting the kind of forgetfulness that has a good feeling. So they cannot give up, or they cannot let go this kind of comfort that arises by coming into contact with good sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and so on. And they do not know that there is another kind of happiness or pleasure that is so much better off than the pleasure that they are getting from these sensual objects. Even though there is the kind of happiness and pleasure that excels so many times than the worldly pleasure or the sensual pleasure, they cannot be persuaded at all, because they had wrong beginning of taking pleasure in sensual objects. They are forgetful of the wholesomeness, especially people who come from countries which are scientifically or technologically advanced, the countries who are producing newer and newer things and gadgets, and the countries where the standard of living is high. People who come from such countries, they are spending most of their time having fun, going here and there, eating, going out, and so on. And they do not come for practicing the Dhamma, because they cannot lose, they do not want to bear losing the sensual pleasure. That's why they do not turn themselves, or they do not direct themselves into practicing the Dhamma. So these people are forgetting the kind of forgetting with good feeling. So when coming to practice, one should be mindful as much as possible. If one does not know that one should control one's mind, not to go onto sensual objects, not to go onto desirable sensual objects, if the person lets the mind go free on these desirable objects, 5 kinds of sensual objects, then they will be having fun, they will be having pleasure, going, coming, here and there. So this kind of people is said to be negligent, forgetful, failing, and it is called Appamada. So there is a definite law that if the person is letting the mind go free on 5 kinds of sensual objects, taking pleasure in going, coming, in other activities, he, she is said to be negligent, failing, or heedless. So it is called Appamada. So people who practice the Dhamma, they practice austerity in sensual pleasure. They do not let their mind go free on sensual objects or sensual pleasure. So being mindful, not letting the mind go free on these sensual objects, sensual pleasure, they are said to be not forgetting, not negligent, not failing. So it is called Appamada. So as a yogi, one should be mindful continuously so that the mind will not go freely on the sensual objects. So the difference is the person, the yogi, come across pleasant objects, but if he, she is not mindful, he, she will fall into the trap or fall into the bondage which bonds the mind, the sensual object which captivates the mind. So if the person is mindful, then he, she is not falling into captivity of these sensual objects. So the person is said to be saving himself, herself out of the bondage or captivity of sensual objects. So if there is Appamada, failing to practice austerity in these sensual objects, the person is losing wholesomeness. So as a yogi, one should be mindful so that one will not be losing the kind of wholesomeness, bhavana kusala, the kind of wholesomeness, by developing the mind and the knowledge which is of high class. So by being mindful, the yogi is not losing the high class wholesomeness, but yogi will be developing bhavana which has this mindfulness as chief. So if one is forgetful, negligent, he, she will lose, he, she will be having failure. But if the person is mindful, then he, she will profit. By being mindful every single second, second by second, the person is said to be profiting second by second. So what Sayadaw explained a few days ago and what Sayadaw explained today are in accordance with Vipanga. So letting one's mind go freely on the misconduct, the kind of failure, negligence or forgetfulness is called Appamada. And this is a gross form of Appamada. The forgetfulness one can get by letting one's mind free on misconduct. But the kind of Appamada, letting one's mind free on sensual objects, it is also called Appamada, but it is medium form of failure, negligence, and forgetfulness. So letting their mind free on the sensual objects is not as gross as freeing the mind on misconduct. Because this kind of forgetfulness, letting the mind go free on the sensual object, it is medium form of Appamada. And Sayadaw will go on to explain about the refined form of Appamada in accordance with Vibhanga in his next Dhamma talk. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.